What's going on for you? How could I help?
So Steve, I think I told you this the last time we talked. I'm gonna be taking the July LSAT, and I think I have like about 4 months before that, like give or take it, like few days. Uh, and I'm also going to be trying to take three LSATs in total by the end of the year, if necessary. So I'm just giving myself some time to prepare for the LSAT. I've done a little bit of training for the LSAT before. I would say about 3 to 4 months before this, but I feel like the training I've been doing is very like broad and like aimless. And although I've seen an improvement in my score, I feel like my logic games I'm happy where I'm at with, but my logical reasoning, however, I feel very like very iffy because certain questions, even though they're super hard, I can get them right, but some of the easier questions I sometimes make a mistake on. It's very like non-consistent, right? Inconsistent with my like uh the scores I'm getting. So I just wanted to know if there's a particular way that I can approach learning the logical reasoning games that can help me get to a score within the next 4 to 6 months.
Sure, absolutely. So it sounds like you're looking for a general framework for studying for the LSAT overall. Is that correct?
Yes, but also logical reasoning in particular. I want to put more emphasis on logical reasoning because I've definitely been getting a -1 to a -0 in logic games with timing. But logical reasoning, I'm going over the time limit. I'm also like, uh, I'm falling for a lot of traps. So when there's a timer on, I start reading through the options really fast, and any option that resembles what could be an answer, I pick and move on, and that leads me to pick a lot of traps. Um, and I just want to know if there's a way to study particularly for the logical reasoning exams.
Yeah, sure, absolutely. And so it sounds like maybe the review process for logical reasoning would be useful for you. What does your review process look like right now?
I'm not gonna be honest. I don't do this for every single question I get it right, but for every question I get wrong, I look at it and I see why I made a mistake. So I would just read their prompts and try writing down certain notes right next to the questions. Um, yeah,
Okay, so explanations are good, but you don't want to use them as a crutch. The first step
right,
after you get something wrong or you have difficulty with something is to engage in your own review process, analyzing your own thoughts.
right.
So for
Okay,
logical reasoning, the framework I recommend for this is called the Socratic review method. And the Socratic review method is a way to really get to the root of where your misunderstanding stemmed from. Was it in the
got it.
stimulus? Was it in the question stem? Or was it in the answer choices? If it was in the stimulus, you want to figure out what it was about the method of reasoning that made
Hmm.
it more difficult for you. Maybe they buried the conclusion in the middle. Maybe they
Right,
require you to take the contrapositive. Maybe they used
right,
annoying words like unless, except, until, or without. Or
right,
maybe it's
right,
just on a topic that pre-law students typically don't like science.
right. Okay. So were you talking about understanding my own thought process and why I made a mistake in certain questions, right?
Yeah, exactly.
Perfect. Okay. So while preparing for logical reasoning or the LSAT as a whole, um, how would you recommend me splitting my time between practices and, like learning concepts?
It's all valuable. I mean, there's a place for all
Hmm.
of it. There's theory and there's application. And
Right.
then there's review after the application. And there's more on the Socratic review method I could get into later if you like about question stems and answer
Right.
choices. But
Yeah.
you build the foundation first, and then you
Uh-huh.
move on to practice to solidify it. Then you work on
Right.
pacing and endurance.
Right. So I'm in college right now. I'm taking about 18 credit hours of classes. I would I would I would like to take at least one test a week, like one practice test a week. Would you recommend taking the tests or like taking sections at this point?
I would suggest that I think doing one exam a week is good to stay
Right.
fresh on it, but only after you feel like you've built a strong foundation.
Right. Okay. Using the Socratic method, can that help me get my timing up as well? Like, because me understanding what I do wrong, would that help me? understand like how to approach the question in the most efficient way possible.
Yeah, it will help indirectly, because if it helps you better understand the questions, then
Right.
next time you encounter a similar one, you'll be able to solve it more efficiently, because you will have already understood that type of method of reasoning, and you'll be better able to navigate the tricks that LSAC throws at you.
Got it. So I have another question, right? So when you're reading logical reasoning, like a prompt, would you read the stimulus first or question first? Because you told me that you read the question first, and I've only been reading the stimulus first, then moving on to the question, then moving on to my answer choices. And if I don't understand, if I'm not satisfied with any of my answer choices, then I go back to the stimulus to see if I can get like more information than to match a possible answer choice. How would you recommend I go about that process? Because I've heard a lot of I've read a lot of things online that recommend like a lot of different things, but how would you go about it?
Well, I prefer question stem first. Others prefer stimulus first. Ultimately, it's not really that big a deal. And since you're aiming to take the LSAT in the summer, you've got plenty of time to try out both styles, both approaches, and see what works better for you. Personally, I like question stem first because it shows me the perspective from which to view the stimulus, whether I'm looking for gaps or not. So for example, in a must be true question or most strongly supported, I'm not concerned with gaps in an argument. And in fact, it may simply be a fact set. But in other cases like flaw or strengthen or weaken, the gap is incredibly important to focus on.
Right. So your strategies are like completely different for the type of questions you're reading, rather than having one like preset strategy that you're going to apply to every single question.
Exactly. I mean, there's over a dozen different types of logical reasoning questions, and they all require different approaches and different perspectives.
Right. I feel like even though I read all these concepts, when it comes to like taking a section or doing a practice test, I feel like when you're like competing against time, it's hard to apply each one of these concepts perfectly to every single one of these questions. How would that come with practice, or would that come with, doing questions untimed, then like getting a feel for it, then moving on, like timing your sections, then taking practice? How would you recommend that?
It's all valuable work, and it does take time as well. The LSAT's an incredibly difficult exam, and it requires building the foundation first. And the framework underlying my LSAT study plans is what I call the laser approach to LSAT studying: learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. So learning is the theory, accuracy is questions by type, S is for sections, individual timed 35-minute sections, E is for exams and endurance, and R is for review. So each of these things has their place. Questions by type has its place. Reviewing concepts and building the foundation has its place. And then pulling it all together with full-length exams also has its place. And so it's all valuable, and I think a mix of all of this is important. And since you're taking it in the summer, and we're speaking now in February, you've got enough time to slow down and just work on the foundation. If you don't feel like you have a strong foundation, then I wouldn't even worry about full-length exams yet.
Got it. Okay. And I have one last, I'm so sorry, I've been asking.
Not at all, please.
So there's two things that I want to ask you about. So shell type questions, right? So in logical reasoning, so questions that are similar in concept to the stimulus, but they're like innately different, but like an answer choice is based on the other concept. So those kind of questions really trip me up, because it's hard to recognize those answers, those answer choices from the right answer choices. How is there a trick to going about those type of questions?
Yeah, sure. And so when you're referring to like really tempting wrong answers and discouraging right answers, this is to circle back to our earlier discussion on Socratic review method. We talked about the stimulus, but there's also the answer choices. And tougher questions have really tempting wrong answers and discouraging right answers. So one of the things you want to be looking at as you engage in your review process is what was tempting about the wrong answer choice that made you pick it or consider it, and what ultimately makes it wrong, and what is discouraging about the right answer that pushed you away from it and made it seem unappealing, and what ultimately makes it correct. So you have these traps of discouragement away from the wrong answer and traps of encouragement towards the right answer. And these are things you want to articulate for yourself. And looking at explanations, this is really where it becomes a crutch because it prevents you from engaging in your own analysis here. And so you talk this out with a friend, a study buddy, a coach, a tutor, or just writing out in a journal. But put it in your own words before you look at other sources.
So so the Socratic learning method would occur, Socratic review, or that would occur before me reading the explanation given by the textbook or like the workbook.
Exactly. At least give it a shot on your own first and see if you could figure out what led you astray. And if you can't figure it out, or you've already given it the time to figure it out on your own, then you could look at other sources to see what other people think about the same question. And they may confirm your understanding. They may disconfirm it and add new information or a totally different approach. But it is ultimately good to get the various perspectives, but first think it over for yourself.
Got it. That's awesome. One last question I have is for a question that requires necessary versus sufficient, when do you want a diagram? Because I've always felt like I understand it, but diagramming could help me, but diagramming also takes up a lot of time if it's like a very more complex structure with multiple sufficient necessary sentences. So what would you think is the right time for you to diagram a sufficient and necessary diagram for
logical reasoning? In logical reasoning, I would recommend diagramming very few question types. Most logical reasoning questions do not lend themselves well to diagramming, and most of them are more informal logic in nature, which means you're really thinking through them in a real world sense. Now, conditionality, of course, does appear, and when conditionality appears to a certain extent, to a certain level, then it does become worth diagramming, but it's only for certain question types. Specifically, sufficient assumption questions, must be true questions, and parallel reasoning questions. Those are the three biggest areas where conditional reasoning comes in, and there's also must be true questions. But this is not all the time. This is only in certain instances. So some must be true questions lend themselves to diagramming, others don't. Some sufficient assumptions lend themselves to diagramming, others don't. So you really have to look at the specifics of the question and just how many conditional statements are involved, and also to what extent they can be linked together.
Got it. That's awesome. Okay. And one last question. I'm so sorry. I'm taking a lot of time. One last question is regarding reading comprehension, right? So I've been taking reading comprehension. Sometimes I do great and I get like a -4 and like 4, or like sometimes I do really bad. I get like a 10 to 11. I definitely think I can apply the Socratic review method to these questions as well. But the one thing I wanted to ask was, does reading more complicated like articles on a day-to-day basis help you with approaching the reading comprehension section of the LSAT, like reading The Economist or the New York Times, Wall Street Journal? Does that really help with taking the reading comprehension?
Yeah, it could certainly help. It definitely wouldn't hurt. I wouldn't consider it actual study time though. And given that your timeline is maybe something like 3 to 4 months, then you are better off focusing on actual LSAT reading comp passages. I mean, there's nearly 100 released exams, so that's nearly 400 passages. And so I wouldn't want you reading The Economist at the expense of reading actual LSAT passages.
Got it.
At the same time, though, I understand the need to do something a little bit lighter occasionally, and obviously mainstream journalism is a little bit more engaging than LSAT passages are. So if you want to take a break from the serious stuff, then read The Economist for sure.
Right. Okay, cool. Awesome, man. Thank you so much for your help. So if I want to apply for tutoring with you, how would I go about that process?
Yeah, sure. We could definitely have another discussion to go more in depth on that as well. I'd love to know more about what your daily schedule is like. Could you share more on that?
So my daily schedule is basically, I have classes from it usually differs every single day. Thursdays are my heaviest classes, but Wednesdays and Fridays I have no classes. Usually I have 2 online classes, which I usually do on Sundays because it's a very lighter class. It's not too much of a a tasking class. It's like very like it's like elective in GE. So my Monday classes are usually around 10 to 1 or 2, 3 o'clock, right? So let's say 3 o'clock, right? I come back to my apartment at 3 o'clock. So I usually wake up. I do my logical reasoning work in the mornings. I do it for an hour. And I go to class, come back, do my homework. Then I go to work. Then I go to the gym. Then I come back. Then if I have more time left, I go back to the problems I did earlier, and I see what mistakes I made. I do usually about like an hour each day, but I definitely need to be pushing it a little bit more. During exam weeks, it's a little bit lower. When it's not exam weeks, I usually put like a couple hours a day, but I just don't have a structure to it, which I feel like is like hurting my process of getting the score I want.
Yeah.
Because when I don't have a routine, like a proper routine when it comes to the LSATs, it's always it doesn't like propel me to the goal I want to achieve.
Of course.
And I definitely want to get a routine to it. I need to have like, I feel like I'm almost aimless when I do my problems. I feel like it's more of like just repetition at this point, not learning something new. I want to learn, like, I want to be able to have a structure, like do certain things certain days to help me move forward in attaining my score.
Yeah, well, that's definitely something I could help you out with. And so my recommendation for now is write out your review process as I described in this conversation. Write it out for at least 3 questions in logical reasoning that give you trouble. Then email it to me. And then once you do, we'll schedule another call to talk about what a coaching program could look like.
Perfect, man. Perfect. I'll send it to you by like tonight or like tomorrow afternoon.
Awesome. Great. And then I'll send you a link to book another time where we could have another call discussing the coaching in depth.
That'll be perfect. Thank you. It was great talking to you. Thank you for answering all my questions.
My pleasure, Mithran. Same. But before we sign off, what would you say is the biggest insight you got from our call today?
The biggest insight I got was more of self-reflection. I feel like that's definitely going to be a big part of the LSAT and becoming a better LSAT taker. I didn't think of it that way because I always thought, books are always right. But talking to you, I started, looking at your other videos, it's more about you being your key source of information rather than depending on someone else.
Awesome. Well, really glad I was able to help. Please keep in touch and we'll talk soon.
Definitely, Steve. Nice talking to you. Have a great day.
Same. You too. Bye. Thanks for tuning into the show. Please subscribe if you haven't done so already to be notified of new episodes as I release them. And feel free to reach out if you need anything at all as you move forward with your prep. I'm happy to help however I can. In the meantime, I'll wish you all the best and take care.